Hello, my friends. Today, I am bringing you something a little different. This is a story I recently told to fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious on MrBallen's official Discord server. It's a journey through time, where a strange celestial phenomenon has seemingly caused dark and mysterious occurrences. Humans have always been fascinated by the night sky. The sun, moon, and planets were unexplainable to humankind for centuries. Celestial phenomena such as eclipses, the northern lights, meteor showers, and comets have awed and terrified people. Without the benefits of modern-day science and space exploration, superstition ran rampant, and all kinds of celestial events were viewed with fascination and fear. Historically, comets have inspired fear and awe. Comets were often seen as a bad omen, branded with titles such as the Harbinger of Doom and the Menace of the Universe. A chunk of ice and dust. The menace of the universe? I mean, that's what a comet is, after all. It's typically composed of ice, dust, and frozen gases, like carbon monoxide, methane, and ammonia, from outer space's cold and dark reaches. They have highly elliptical orbits. Some appear regularly, like Halley's Comet, visible every 76 years. As they approach the sun, attracted by its gravity, they enter our observable range. Heat from the sun evaporates frozen gases and ice, and under the effects of radiation and solar wind, the comet's illuminated tail appears. Many comets, even great ones, may burn up, break into pieces, or even disappear as they pass the sun. Some ancient cultures looked up at the night and saw the large and bright comet streaking across the sky, giving the appearance of the head of a sorrowful woman with long and flowing hair. This was seen as a despairing image that meant the gods were displeased with Earth. Other ancient cultures saw the comet as a fiery sword blazing across the darkened sky, which was seen as a sign that war and death would be unleashed upon the land. Legends began to form, inspiring even more dread of these celestial spectacles. The Roman prophecies, the Sibylline oracles, spoke of a great conflagration from the sky falling to earth. The Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh described fire, brimstone, and flood with the arrival of a comet. Rabbi Moses ben Nachman wrote of God taking 2 stars from Kema and throwing them at the earth to begin the Great Flood. Yakut legend in ancient Mongolia called comets the daughter of the devil and warned of destruction, storm, and frost whenever she approached the earth. The influence of comets on cultures is not limited to tales of myth and legend. Comets throughout history have been blamed for some of history's darkest times, and in many religions, it is believed that the Last Judgment will be foretold by a comet. Ancient Greeks believed that comets were illusions caused by disturbances in the atmosphere. They regarded comets as a big fire in the sky because of their brightness and association with hot and arid weather, which led to hurricanes, rainstorms, and droughts. Findings reveal that in 372 BC, there were earthquakes and tsunamis as comets flew through the sky. In 340 BC, there were hurricanes when a comet passed by. Aristotle believed that comets were an indicator of climate, When several appeared in a year, it would usually be arid and stormy. 44 BC, Julius Caesar had been assassinated, and funerary games were being held. A large comet appeared and was said to have been seen for 7 days. Caesar's adopted son Octavian, soon to be Emperor Augustus, interpreted this comet as a sign of the deification of Julius Caesar. In his epic poem, the Aeneid, Virgil describes how a star appeared in the daytime, and Augustus persuaded people to believe it was Caesar. Augustus celebrated the comet and the deification of Caesar on coins, and many examples still survive today. The Great Comet of 1264 was very bright, and reportedly remained visible for 4 months, starting in July. Pope Urban IV was said to have become suddenly ill and died on the last day it was visible. Fast forward to October 1811. A bright comet made its closest approach to the Earth. This was known as the Great Comet of 1811. Some saw this as an omen of an impending disaster. That disaster came on December 16th, when a massive earthquake shook the Midwest and southern United States. This earthquake was so intense that the Mississippi River temporarily flowed backward. Americans soon linked the comet with the quake. They blamed it again when the U.S. and England declared war the following year. Napoleon Bonaparte saw the comet as a herald of good news. He believed that he would be victorious in his invasion of Russia. Napoleon later realized that the comet was a bad omen, after his defeat at the hands of the Russians. The Great Chicago Fire remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 19th century. The fire lasted from October 8th to October 10th, 1871, destroying 1/3 of the homes in Chicago. One Mrs. O'Leary and her cow were blamed for starting the fire, even though there is no evidence to prove they were guilty. Other speculations have been raised, including one that involves a comet. Ignatius Donnelly claimed the gas from the tail of a passing comet fell to Earth and caused the spark that started the fire. Others said they saw fire fall from the skies when the Great Chicago Fire started. That theory may be plausible, considering that Chicago was not the only place that burned that October. Similar fire outbreaks occurred along Lake Michigan and Peshtigo, Wisconsin that very same day. The Peshtigo Fire was actually the deadliest fire in U.S. history, despite being overshadowed by the Chicago Fire. Comets have been believed to be linked to all sorts of disasters: wars, the downfall of leaders, the destruction of property, and the extinction of animal species. Halley's Comet is likely the most well-known of all comets. While it only passes by the Earth roughly once every 76 years, its appearance has often played a mysterious role in history. Halley's Comet influenced people like Genghis Khan in his westward expansion. It was seen as a sign of the fall of Rome, and helped convince the Normans that God was on their side to invade England back in 1066. It also brought about doomsday predictions, charlatans, and outlandish attempts to stop the world's end, including human sacrifice. What is believed to be known as the first observation of what is now known as Halley's Comet was by ancient Chinese astronomers in 239 BC, which coincided around the time of the end of the First Punic War. The Babylonians recorded early sightings on clay tablets in 164 BC and 87 BC. The Romans made reference to the comet in 12 BC. In June of 451 AD, Halley's Comet was thought to predict the outcome of the Battle of the Catalonian Plains and the defeat of Attila the Hun. Within 3 weeks, Attila the Hun invaded Roman France, and the Roman world cowered before him. Earlier in the 440s, a solar eclipse had darkened the sun, and the next lunar eclipse turned the moon red like blood. The sighting of strange and mysterious events in the sky, including Halley's Comet, only added to the aura of terror surrounding Attila. Though Attila would be repelled at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains by the Romans and Visigoths, the damage done by this invasion was immense. The Visigoths fled to Spain, and Western Rome would not survive the century. In 684, when Halley's Comet passed by, there were 3 months of rainstorms, followed by the plague. During its appearance in 837, it is recorded that Holy Roman Emperor Louis the Pious thought his demise was imminent, which led him to fast, pray, and make good deeds. In 912, the comet is noted in the Annals of Ulster. A dark and rainy year, a comet appeared. Probably the most famous appearance of Halley's Comet occurred in 1066, coinciding with the Norman Conquest. On October 14, 1066, troops loyal to King Harold II of England faced the Norman army led by William the Conqueror in the Battle of Hastings. Halley's Comet, which had appeared in April of that year, was linked to the battle. However, astrologers in England could not determine if it was a good or bad omen. They discovered it was a bad omen when King Harold was killed. However, what was bad for King Harold was good for William the Conqueror, who had also spotted the comet in France on his journey to England for the battle. He called it a wonderful sign from heaven and suggested it was evidence that he would win the war. He was right. A Canterbury monk sketched the comet during its 1145 appearance on the bottom of a manuscript of Psalms that he was transcribing, and ended up immortalizing himself and the comet in a way he did not expect. In 1222, Halley's Comet flew by again, with perhaps the most devastating effect in history. Khan Temujin, known to the West as Genghis Khan, decided that the comet was his own personal star. He saw that its westward track was a sign that he should focus his conquests westward. He would die only 5 years later. However, his descendants continued to expand the vast Mongol Empire into Eastern Europe, taking parts of Russia, Bulgaria, and Hungary, slaughtering millions along the way. The resulting Mongol Empire was the largest in history, stretching from Poland to the Chinese coast. It's possible that Florentine painter Giotto di Bondone could have sighted Halley's Comet in 1301. It's thought the comet inspired the Star of Bethlehem in his Scrovegni Chapel fresco. In the fresco, a bright, comet-like star with a long tail can be seen in the night sky, there to lead the 3 magi to Jesus' place of birth. The comet's 1378 appearance is recorded in Italian and East Asian sources. Comets had become so intertwined with disaster that Pope Calixtus III excommunicated Halley's Comet in 1456 as an instrument of the devil, and interestingly, it overlapped with the Ottoman Empire's invasion of the Balkans and the siege of Belgrade. It was in 1705 that English astronomer Edmund Halley intellectually tamed the mysteries of comets. Based on the teachings of his friend Isaac Newton and his theory of gravity, Halley reviewed archival evidence of comets in 1531, 1607, and 1682 and concluded they were one and the same. Halley predicted that it would return in 1759 and was posthumously proved correct. That's the reason why it was later called Halley's Comet. In 1835, the comet was blamed for such widely diverse events as the Zulu massacre of 280 people in South Africa and a major wildfire in New York City that raged for several nights. The lives of legends like Davy Crockett would burn out with Halley's Comet at the fall of the Alamo during the Texas Revolution. 1835 was also the same year that prolific writer Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, was born. Twain predicted his own death and linked it to the passage of the comet. He remarked, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt. Now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together. They must go out together." Indeed, Twain died on April 21st, 1910, when Halley's Comet was again visible. 1910. The year that Halley's Comet hype was at its peak, and it was the subject of great concern. Apparently, some superstitious people felt that the comet was somehow responsible for the death of England's King Edward VII. It also was apparently a sign of the coming invasion by the Germans. Others felt it was responsible for flooding the Seine in France. It didn't help that the New York Times had printed a story just months prior by a Frenchman named Camille Flammarion that stated, "As we pass through the comet's tail, cyanogen gas would impregnate the atmosphere and possibly snuff out all life on the planet." Rumor spread that the comet would be releasing toxic gases as it flew by. Reaction to this perceived threat was predictable. Many people panicked. As a result, fraudsters sold anti-comet pills, with one brand promising to be an elixir for escaping the wrath of the heavens, at the high price of $1 per pill, the equivalent of $31 per pill today. A voodoo doctor in Haiti was said to be selling pills as fast as he can make them. 2 Texas charlatans were arrested for marketing sugar pills as the cure-all for all things comet, but police let them go when customers demanded their freedom. Comet protecting umbrellas were sold, and gas masks were flying off the shelves. Leaflets were printed with advice saying, "Warning to the inhabitants of the city, close your windows and keep indoors, for the earth will soon pass through the tail of the terrible comet, and its poisonous gases will fill the heavens." A shepherd in Washington state was reported to have gone insane with worry about the comet, while a rancher in New Mexico chose to stop living rather than experience what he thought would be the end of the world. In California, a prospector nailed his feet and one hand to a cross and, despite his agony, pleaded with rescuers to let him remain there. When a horse collapsed on a Spokane, Washington street during the day on May 18th, a passerby declared that it must have been struck by the comet. There were reports of people selling all their possessions to drink themselves into a stupor while they still could. Churches found themselves packed to the brim with worried followers day and night. At home, people were boarding up windows and plugging up keyholes to keep out the comet's vapors. May 18th started out as a typical day for 16-year-old Jane Warfield. Typical aside from all the talk about the comet that would surely be happening through the small town of Aileen, Oklahoma again on this day. Jane lit the stove for the day's cooking and went out to milk the cow and gather eggs before breakfast. As she walked toward the small barn, the first rays of dawn were beginning to peek, and she could hear the rustling in the barn. She stepped inside, and everything went dark. Henry Heinemann was a religious fanatic who came into town 2 years prior with his sect of select followers. It wasn't long before he married Jane's widowed mother and became her stepfather. Her mother became swept up in his sermons, believing that sin had passed from them and that they could handle serpents and drink poison without evil effects. Heinemann claimed that he had received a message from God that the world would end on the 18th of May, and the comet now in the sky would spread pestilential gases across the earth, eliminating all animal life. Only a blood sacrifice would serve as atonement for the world's sins and avert the disaster. It was known in the community that the much-heralded approach of Halley's Comet and the threatened danger attached to its appearance had affected the fanatics. Frequent meetings were being held, yet all their secrets were closely guarded. Sheriff Hughes had been informed of the religious enthusiasts known as the Select Followers. He got word that their leader, Henry Heinemann, claimed to have received a revelation from God that the world would end, and that the only thing that would prevent the disaster was a blood sacrifice. In order to save the world, a sacrifice had been planned, and the lot had fallen to Jane Warfield, his stepdaughter. Sheriff Hughes had kept track of their movements closely. With his posse of men, he reached the dell in the Gloss Mountains just as the sacrifice was being prepared and just in the nick of time. The Warfield girl's hands were bound, and she was tied to a stake in front of a large fire. She was clad in spotless white, with a wreath of white roses around her head. Dozens of sect members were chanting and praying around the scene, some with hands raised to the heavens, others fallen to their knees. Heinemann was standing in front of the girl with a long, sharp hunting knife in his hand. Sheriff Hughes and his men came charging in just as Heinemann raised the knife above his head. His followers attempted to fight the officers and the rest of the posse, but they were overcome with little difficulty. Heinemann was arrested and placed in the county jail. Sheriff Hughes rescued Jane and put her in the hands of safe parties where they could watch the passing comet in peace. Now, there are disputes about whether the tale of Jane Warfield is true or not, despite it appearing in several newspapers, including the Washington Post, the Oklahoma City Times, and the New York Daily Tribune. However, one tragedy that did befall a 16-year-old girl was that of Amy Hopkins. Amy was watching the comet on a rooftop in Brooklyn with her friends when she fell and lost her life. More rational humans saw Halley's Comet for what it really was, a truly spectacular event that many of us only see once in a lifetime. People hosted comet watch parties, bars served cyanogen cocktails, and comet-themed songs and jokes were a hit. As Earth passed through the comet's tail on May 19, 1910, curious onlookers packed rooftops around the world. Unfortunately, some townspeople missed out on all the fun due to the pesky cloud cover. However, the newspaper, the Atlanta Constitution, seemed relieved, declaring the clouds had, in fact, saved the city. Realizing they'd survived a near apocalypse, boards came off windows and doors. People danced and embraced in the streets. Well, except for Amy Hopkins' parents, sadly. I was a small child when Halley's Comet made its last flyby in 1986, and my young mind remembers it as much of a non-event. I think I remember looking at this tiny light moving up in the sky and asking my mom, "Is that it?" Apparently, I wasn't the only one disappointed, as Peter Lewis, writing for the New York Times, described the comet's fizzle as fuzzy and feeble. 1986 was the least favorable year on record for viewing Halley's Comet. In February, the comet and the Earth were on opposite sides of the Sun, which created the worst possible viewing circumstances during the previous 2,000 years. The comet appeared brightest when it was almost invisible from the northern hemisphere in March and April, with the best chances of a sighting close to the horizon at dawn and dusk, if not obscured by clouds. And sadly for the space community, the thrill of seeing Halley's Comet in 1986 was overshadowed by the Challenger disaster on January 28th. Spoiler alert! Halley's Comet isn't due to fly by Earth again until July 2061. Rumor has it that it will be better positioned for observation than it was in 1986, as it will be on the same side of the Sun as Earth. Now, I didn't come in with Halley's Comet like Mark Twain, but there's a chance I'll be around to see it fly by Earth again in 2061. Some of you, like me, might be fortunate to see Halley's Comet twice in a lifetime. Now, there have been and will be other comets that fly by the Earth. In 1997, the Hale-Bopp comet was rumored to be a doomsday comet. It led the Heaven's Gate religious cult members to end their own lives, believing they would be taken aboard a UFO they thought was hiding behind the comet. Although none of these comets have triggered an apocalypse, they do have something important to teach us about prophecy. Edmund Halley astonished the 18th century world by predicting the return of a comet that now bears his name. He used Newton's law of gravity to achieve that feat and prove that science could do what astrologers and prophets had always claimed to do: to predict a future occurrence. Today, with our advances in science and technology, we have the help of NASA and planetary defense. Planetary defense detects the possibility and warns of potential asteroid or comet impacts with Earth, preventing them or mitigating their possible effects. According to Stuart Clark, the author of The Sensorium of God, the ability to predict future events is a powerful property of classical physics. It relies on measurement and the clockwork rigidity of certain physical laws. Without these, prediction is impossible, even within science. So, if someone claims to have made a prediction, or even a prophecy, ask what exactly has been measured. What exactly has been calculated? What exactly has been predicted? If the answer to any of these is effectively not sure or nothing, then disbelieve it. For thousands of years of human civilization, comets have come and gone, yet we're still here. For those who have an interest in the strange, dark, and mysterious, staying in a hotel with a haunted reputation seems like an ideal getaway. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado inspired Stephen King's The Shining, and there are hundreds of other hotels around the world that reportedly have paranormal activity. The Skirvin is Oklahoma City's oldest hotel. Built in 1910 by W.B. Bill Skirvin, the hotel was said to be the finest in the Southwest. Skirvin participated in the land run before Oklahoma's statehood and earned his wealth in oil and land. Skirvin hired architect Solomon Andrew Layton, and the two set forth to make the hotel as self-sufficient as possible for its time. It had air conditioning, running water going to each room, and in-house laundry service. With two 10-story towers and 225 rooms, the Skirvin Hotel opened its doors in 1911. The spacious lobby greeted guests with an English Gothic decor. A carving of the Roman god of wine and intoxication overlooks the lobby still to this day. A drugstore and other retail shops were on the ground floor in one wing. The cafe, complete with a stage for musicians, was on the other side. There was also a ballroom that seated 500 and imported Austrian chandeliers that cost more than $100,000 each at that time. Skirvin moved his family into a 5-room suite on the 9th floor. In addition to his 3 children, the Skirvin household consisted of the kids' menagerie of dogs, raccoons, hawks, and other animals, which they kept on the roof. Skirvin's daughter, Peromesta, became known as the hostess with the mostess. The Skirvin became a popular speakeasy during Prohibition. During this time, W.B. Skirvin was said to have had an affair with one of the hotel maids, nicknamed Effie. According to legend, Effie became pregnant, and, to prevent a scandal, she was locked in a room on the 10th floor of the hotel. She became depressed, and even after the birth of her child, she was still not let out of the room. She is said to have jumped out of the window with her baby in her arms. In 1930, a 3rd wing was added to the hotel, and the building was raised to 14 stories, now making the capacity 525 rooms. The lobby was expanded, and they included a cabaret club and rooftop garden. As much of the country was hit with the Depression, the oil boom in Oklahoma City kept the Skirvin Hotel going strong. Bill Skirvin operated the hotel until his death in 1944. Skirvin's 3 children decided to sell the property to Dan W. James in 1945. The hotel was modernized for its time to include numerous amenities such as room service, a swimming pool, and beauty and barber shops. James sold the hotel to Chicago investors in 1963. Guests included politicians, ranchers, tribal members, oil-rich millionaires, mud-covered drillers, and even bank robbers. As one of the best hotels in the city, it has played hosts to many notable figures, including Harry Truman, Teddy Roosevelt, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Ronald Reagan. Additional guests included Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Bob Hope, Elvis Presley, John Wayne, and Jimmy Hoffa. Over the years, the hotel changed hands several more times. However, poor occupancy forced the hotel to shut down in 1988. For 19 years, the Skirvin Hotel sat abandoned in downtown Oklahoma City. Apparently, it was an urban exploring hotspot back in the day. In 2002, the city of Oklahoma City acquired the property and put together a financing package to renovate, restore, and reopen the historic Skirvin Hotel. The Skirvin Hotel reopened in 2007 and is once again the place to see and be seen, with guests including former Beatles Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, former President Bill Clinton, acting legend Kristen Chenoweth, and an array of NBA stars including LeBron James, Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, Chris Paul, and Steph Curry. Speaking of NBA players, it seems professional basketball players aren't immune to paranormal activity. Players from the Chicago Bulls saw doors slamming on their own and heard bizarre noises through their doors. After losing to the Oklahoma City Thunder, the New York Knicks blamed their poor game on their haunted hotel rooms at the Skirvin Hotel. Over the years, staff and guests reported strange noises and occurrences, including things seemingly being moved around by themselves, such as the maid's cart being pushed down the hall when no one was there. It is not uncommon for guests to complain about an inability to sleep, sometimes due to the sounds of a child crying. According to some, a nude woman has appeared to male hotel guests while showering. Effie was rumored to be a woman of loose morals, and some men who have stayed in the hotel have often reported being propositioned by a female voice while alone in their rooms. If you're feeling brave, try booking room 1015. It's said to be the most active room in the hotel. It's rumored to be the very room in which Effie was supposedly kept hidden away until her untimely death. Another explanation for the haunting of room 1015 is the rumor that the 10th floor was once used for illegal gambling and prostitution. Perhaps those heavy footsteps and knocks are residual hauntings from the Prohibition days when the hotel served as a speakeasy. As for me and my personal, strange, dark, and mysterious experience at the Skirvin Hotel, this took place several years ago. I had a lovely evening, including dinner at the hotel restaurant and an after-dinner drink in the piano bar. We returned to the room, settled in, and fell fast asleep with no problems. At some point in the night, I had a dream that someone was in the room, moving around. It was just this dark shadow, slowly going across the room. In my dream, I just watched it move. Then I woke up. When I awoke, the room was dark, but there was also a dark figure of a person, literally standing beside the bed right next to me. It was clearly a human form, just standing there. I could tell that my spouse was still in bed next to me, and the figure beside me wasn't as tall as the average adult male would be. I thought maybe I was still dreaming at first, but I was too conscious, you know? My mind was racing, and it wasn't like being in a dream state. I reached out to see if anything was actually there. I grabbed on to what looked like this thing's left arm, physically made contact, and pulled on it. This thing fell onto the bed, right across my lap. I could literally feel the weight of this figure on me. I started to yell out and bolted upright in bed, trying to push this thing off of me. My spouse wakes up in a panic, wondering what's wrong. The light comes on, and it's gone. I almost maybe would have chalked it up as sleep paralysis, which I have never experienced, but aside from the hotel's haunted history and other guests' experiences, my spouse said that he was hearing noises during the night as though someone was moving around in the room. Maybe it was Effie. Perhaps it was someone or something else. But I couldn't fall asleep again that night until the sun started to rise and those little bits of light started coming in through the closed curtains. The physical sensation of something falling on me really freaked me out. But if you're ever in Oklahoma and feel like staying in a hotel rumored to be haunted, consider the historic Skirvin Hotel in downtown Oklahoma City. Effie will be waiting for you. Well, that's going to be it for my story. If you like your stories live and with a feminine tone on MrBallen's official Discord server, start singing the song that never ends with a like button and then leave the room before finishing the first verse.